today's video, I'm going to perform a very belated review of the Rebecca Garber translations of Meyer's works. Let me front load this video by saying that Dr. Garber's translations can be found on HEMA Bookshelf, and I highly recommend you pick up a copy, as you'll see in the video. The particular books you're about to see were sent to me courtesy of Michael Chidester of Wigton Hour fame, though of course this is not a paid promotion in any way, and I did back the original crowdfunding for these books, and I have my own copies which you'll also see in this video, but thank you very much to Michael for organising this entire campaign and for sending me copies of these wonderful books. So without further ado, let's get the review underway. When I first began historical fencing, the only access to Meyer's work was via various partial translations which could be found online. Most of those have long since disappeared, but you can get a feeling for what it was like by taking a look at the Wigton Hour page and looking at Rasmussen's translation. This translation is still perfectly serviceable, and when I don't have my hard copy books around, I will often refer back to it. For many Meyer fencers, however, it's the works of Geoffrey Forgang which have formed the basis of their understanding of Meyer's system of fencing. And of these two books, both of which are excellent, it's the 1570 edition of Meyer which has been the most influential on much of the fencing community. This is an excellent book with black and white images as well as a full translation and annotations. And you can see my original copy right here, which is pretty well worn and thoroughly annotated. On the whole, this is an excellent translation and has served most of us pretty well across a lot of years. However, there was room for improvement, and that's where the new edition of the text, with an entirely new translation, appears on the scene. Some years ago, Michael Chidester started a crowdfunding project for new prints and translations of these texts, and this effort has resulted in the books that you can see here today. There are volumes 1 and 2 of the foundational description of the art of fencing, and in addition to that, there's a much more conveniently sized reading edition of the foundational description of the art of fencing. So let's take a look. First, the finish. Beautiful. This is the first book of the reference edition. You can see it's quite a weighty book. This is the hardcover version, though a softcover version is available. And the interesting thing that I like is along the pages of the book, you can see the different sections. So if I open it at this section, I'll be in the Dussac section. If I want to get to the sword section, I can just go to that first one. I can immediately locate all of the sword-based resources in the book. Now, this might not seem important, but it actually really adds to the usability of these books, and these books are meant to be used by practitioners of fencing, so this is a really nice feature. The book itself begins with a thorough introduction of Meyer, including the entire historical context in which Meyer lived, and the context itself of the art which we're going to be practicing in these books. So this is really good for studying Meyer not just as a fencer, but from the historical point of view as well. All of the sections of the book are laid out in this 2-column format, which is very attractive to look at, and on the left-hand side we have the German transcript, while on the right-hand side we have the English translation. So you can really dive into it and compare the English and the German if you're really interested in looking at those sorts of things. So there's the German and there's the English, and this is a really good feature of this book that I really like. It saves having to go and look up other resources online or having two books with different information in them. So that's really nice. You can see just how much content there is in this text, beginning with the longsword, then onto Dussac, rapier, dagger and grappling, and finally onto the polearm section. So the entire text is represented here. There's also a nice appendix which shows all of the sources and where they've come from relating to Meyer, and this is really interesting from a historical point of view and if you want to go and look up the original resources for yourself. One thing I particularly like about this book is the index at the end. It's fairly thorough and it allows you to quickly locate specific resources if you need them, so if you are hunting around for things in the book, the index has been really useful for me. Of course, you may be asking yourself where are the beautiful illustrations Meyer is known for. As I said, this is volume 1 of the reference edition. The plates can be found in volume 2. Volume 2 of the reference edition follows the same formatting conventions as volume 1, with this nice set of dividers along the edge of the book, leading to each section of the text. And each section contains both black and white and colour pictures. These colour pictures are beautifully vibrant and faithfully represent the artworks from the text, and then you've got these reduced minimalist black and white sections, and then a reference table saying where in the book you should look. Splitting the book this way is actually a really good idea. It allows you to look into the red book and see the image you're looking for, and then go and find that section in the blue book, or vice versa. This is really handy because in the older editions you would constantly be flipping backwards and forwards between pages, whereas in these editions you can simply have both versions of the text open and do a straight comparison between the original text and the plates which correlate with it. Flipping through the book, you can see other pieces of art, and this book alone is really valuable, even if you use it with an earlier foregang edition, because it allows you to easily locate things and is quite beautiful to look at. It also has illustrations from the Lund edition, and as well as the Rostock images, as you can see here. And if we flip a little bit further along in the text, there are actually other images which contextualize Meyer's fencing system in art and in representations from the time. There's the works cited section, of course, and some information about the author, which is definitely worth reading, and the editor, of course. So you really should get a copy of this book, especially if you've got the blue book as well. So those two books go together. You've got the red book and the blue book, and it's the perfect pair if you are interested in studying deeply into Meyer. Now, these are the hardcover editions. There is also the softcover edition. This is my personal copy I got from the crowdfunding, and it's just lighter and more convenient, though the hardcovers will of course be a little bit more durable, and you can get those both for the blue book and the red book. And you can see here I've already covered my red book in plastic covering because that durability could be an issue over time, and I am going to get a lot of use out of the red book in particular as I look up those images. There is a third book, which is the reading edition, the green book. Now, I've already coded this one as well because it's going to get a lot of use. This is the practical fences edition, a little smaller in form factor, not quite pocket size, but really quite convenient. And this book is the entirety of the English translation of Meyer's text, along with subsections of the images, as I'll show you in a moment. The introduction to this book was written by Roger Norling, and if you know anything about contemporary Meyer studies in the modern world, you'll know Roger Norling is one of the go-to experts on it. It's a very thorough description and includes illustrations in the history and the context and a lot of information about Meyer's time. There's also a translator's introduction and a translator's note on why certain decisions were made, and this is actually really useful to understand why certain sections of the text read as they do. And as I say, this is a new and really good readable translation of the text, so it's good to have that information as well. Moving on to the content, you'll notice that this book doesn't have those tabs like the others do. Not really necessary, would be a nice to have, but the text itself is laid out in this single column with all of the text flowing, and you can see I've annotated a lot of it here already. Expect this to be a fairly well-worn edition. But the interesting thing is you can see the illustrations are directly in line with the text, so there's no more hunting around for the specific plate. The illustration is there. I really like this. You do lose some of the context in terms of footwork using the converging lines on the original illustrations, but it really does provide a lot of information, and it's convenient to have these in line with the text like that. So you can see those in the Dusek section there with the characters in the foreground erased, and that works right through to the final sections of the book. Towards the back of the book, you've got a basic bibliography and so on, and of course an index. Again, super useful to have an index in these books. It allows you to quickly find things. So that is the reading edition, which is the much more practical edition of the book for people actively studying fencing. So you've got the blue book and the red book, which form a perfect set of reference editions. Great if you're looking at the translations or going in a deep dive into Meyer. And then of course, if you're just looking for a practical description for fencing purposes, there's the green book. So if you're only going to buy one of these books, I highly recommend grabbing the green book because that's the one that's going to be of practical day-to-day use when you're learning the system. One of the things I haven't spoken about very much yet is the translation itself, and if you've ever read any translated book, you'll know the translation is just as important as the original text, especially when it comes to readability and understanding of a technical book like this one. When I first received these books, I didn't appreciate the differences in translation quite as much because I've been so deeply rooted in the foregang edition. However, since working with these books for 6 or more months now, I've really come to appreciate some of the changes. In many cases, you won't see that much of a difference, but there are just little clarifying features which make Dr. Garber's translation just that little bit easier to understand and a little bit more useful to a beginning fencer rather than somebody who's already deeply entrenched in the fencing texts as they are already translated. If you are a foregang reader already, one of the first things you'll notice is some slightly different terminology. A good example of this is the simple brace, which foregang described as straight parrying. Rebecca Garber actually puts a really good description of why some of these changes were made, and after a while it will become second nature reading them, whereas at first when you pick up the book they're slightly jarring. However, for new fencers, these will just be the de facto standard terms that you use, and I can see a time in the future where these will just be the standard terms that everybody uses, no matter which translation you started out using. I'll finish with a reading from both the foregang and the Garber text, so you can get a feeling for the difference between the two for the same section of translation. Let's begin with Vorgäng. Chapter 10. How one shall attack to the four openings. I believe, gracious reader, that I have now sufficiently explained all the elements that are useful for sword combat, so that everyone who will be serious to study this with diligent practice will have sufficient introduction to understand all the devices that follow. I will therefore now show one by one how to act in each guard and how to fight from each of them. But first, since all your cuts and techniques shall be directed at or toward the four parts of your opponent, and conversely you must also be ready for his techniques in the same four parts, it is necessary at the beginning of this section on combat from the guards that I offer proper instruction in this matter, which I will present and set forth through the following examples. And now, the Garber translation. How one should fence at the four openings. Chapter 10. Because, dear reader, all components that support sword fencing have been explained previously to such an extent that any serious person who assesses such things, in addition to diligent practice, will have sufficient instruction for understanding all subsequent sequences, I now want to describe, using one stance after the other, how one should hold oneself therein, and how one should fence with another from each. Prior to this, and because all of your cuts and techniques should be directed at or towards the four parts of the opponent, you must also be attentive to the same four previously mentioned parts. At the beginning of fencing from the stances, it is therefore necessary that I actually describe these parts, which I want to present and set down using the following example. So you can see there's not a great deal of difference in the translation at one level. However, after working with the text for a while, I have found the Garber translation does flow a little bit better, and that can make a huge difference to understanding, and it also makes the text more approachable for new fencers. So once again, I'd like to thank Michael for providing me with these texts and for starting the crowdfunding campaign, and I would like to also thank Rebecca Garber for these excellent translations. If you're interested in Meyer, these books are a must-have, so head to HEMA Bookshelf and add them to your own fencing library. And there you have it. Thanks for watching.